Welcome to the Energy Division staff on the demand response and retail rate sections workshop on the CalFuse white paper and staff proposal. So to start off, I'm going to take us through the agenda. I am Andrew McGee, and I will be going through our opening and logistics with you. Then at 9:40, we will go into opening remarks and introductions from Commissioner Houck and Alok Gupta. Then we will go at 10 into the entire presentation of the staff paper, which will take 2 hours. And we will have a lunch break at noon for an hour. When we come back, we will have a Q&A section, which will be mostly asking questions about the white paper itself. Then we will have a 10-minute break, followed by comments and discussion, where we invite all attendees to kind of give us their opinions and ideas and to discuss with each other and with Energy Division staff about what your thoughts are on this proposal. And then we will end with closing remarks from Paul Phillips and be done by 4 p.m. So a couple logistics before we really get into it. This session in the morning will be recorded, and it will be available online at the link that I am dropping right now into the workshop, or into the chat rather. I am your host, as I said, and Whitney Richardson will be hosting the afternoon session. First, I'd like you to take a moment to think about your safety, note the surroundings and the emergency exits near you. Please do an ergonomic check. We would like your screen to be up near head height and your body in a comfortable, straight position. This is going to be a long workshop, so we want you to be safe. If you are having an emergency, please immediately dial 911, or you can use the chat function to let us know you're having an emergency and we can dial 911 for you. If you are driving, please pull over and do not participate in the workshop while you are driving. So all attendees have been muted. If you would like to ask any questions, please use the raise your hand function and we will unmute you. This is in the afternoon section during Q&A and comments and discussion. We have noticed that each time you would like to ask an additional question, we would ask that you continue to re-raise your hand and then we will unmute you again. The process is I will give you the unmute access. So your screen will come up and say that you've been asked to be unmuted, and then you will click yes that you are accepting that, and that is how you will be able to talk in the afternoon section. If you are using the chat function, please make sure that it is addressed to everyone and not to all panelists so that everyone is able to see your question as it's being asked. And if you would rather type just to the panelists, use the Q&A function and send it to all panelists. Those questions will be read aloud by staff, and as I said, we will unmute you if you would like to ask your question, and in the discussion section to be able to talk about what your thoughts are. Additionally, this workshop is structured to stimulate dialogue and engage a wide variety of perspectives, and therefore we would like all comments to be friendly and respectful. Please use the Q&A feature only for questions or technical issues, because those are the questions that will be read aloud. Please only ask clarifying questions during this morning section. You will probably have your question answered later by another panelist as they continue to go deeper into the white paper. Do not start, please, or respond to sidebar conversations in the chat, or else we will lose important questions that people are asking. And please refrain from discussing any matters related to any open proceeding while the commissioner or their advisors may be in attendance. And with that, I will pass it over to Commissioner Houck for some opening remarks.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for being here today. I'm pleased to be here this morning at today's workshop where we're setting yet another example of how California continues to embrace innovative and groundbreaking approaches to scaling demand flexibility. We've come a long way from creating our first generation of demand flexible programs in the 1980s via emergency demand response programs and are now ready for taking on new approaches to demand flexibility as we design our future advanced grid. Energy Division's white paper offers a promising approach to scaling demand flexibility under the CalFuse framework and is an important step towards harnessing the potential of demand flexibility in California. I'd like to highlight the importance of this new perspective and the critical role it could play in achieving our energy equity and environmental goals in California and across the nation as an example. There has been tremendous time, effort, and expertise put into this white paper, and I'd like to acknowledge and thank all of the Energy Division staff who've worked on it for their invaluable contributions to this effort. I specifically want to recognize the work that Alok Gupta has done and his leadership on the Commission's demand flexibility efforts. These are truly groundbreaking, and I'd also like to invite all interested stakeholders to actively engage with our demand flexibility and high DER proceedings. We rely on the considerable knowledge and expertise of all of the parties involved in this proceeding to help achieve the ambitious goals we have collectively set for California. I'm looking forward to hearing the presentation this morning. I do have a conflict for the early part of the afternoon and hope to try and be back after the afternoon break. And with that, I'm going to conclude my remarks. And again, I look forward to the groundbreaking efforts of this that are set out in the white paper and the proceeding that we just recently opened. And we'll turn it back over to Andrew.
All right, thank you very much. And next we have a workshop introduction from Alok Gupta, the supervisor of the demand response section.
Good morning, Andrew, can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you loud and clear.
All right, let me take over the panel or presentation mode and share the slides again. So good morning, everyone. My name is Alok Gupta, and I'm leading a team of analysts in Energy Division, focusing on the demand response policy domain. So on behalf of
Sorry, Alok, we're not seeing the full screen of the PowerPoint.
All right, let me try that again. How about now?
There you go. Yes.
Thank you for catching that. So as I was saying, on behalf of the team that's working on the CalFuse proposal, I'd like to welcome you all to the workshop. I see we have over 200 attendees and the number is still climbing. So we are excited to finally unveil this this proposal that the team has been working on for multiple years. And so let me just start off addressing some process and procedural questions right away as far as the workshop goes. So this workshop is focused on providing an overview of the recently released CalFuse white paper and staff proposal and seeking feedback from you all. Hopefully you have had a chance to download the white paper from our website. It was released on June 22nd. The link is provided at the bottom of the slide. And you've had time to study that. So in particular, this workshop is not directly associated with any current or future proceeding. The information and discussion at this workshop will not be part of any proceeding record, and no written comments are really expected on this workshop. Having said that, so there is some indirect connection between this workshop and what is about to happen in terms of rulemaking. If you note, if you remember, the CalFuse white paper did recommend, make two key recommendations very early on in the paper, in fact, page 2 of the executive summary, and that was to recommend to the CPUC to initiate a rulemaking, and secondly, to take up this paper's staff proposal in that rulemaking. And I guess to our surprise, well, not really, that's just a figure of speech. Within 3 weeks, the commission did have a voting meeting last week, July 14th, and at that meeting, the commission voted out a new order instituting rulemaking to advance demand flexibility through electric rates. in this rulemaking, which by the way has a number assigned now, 2207005. I don't think the proceeding is yet active on the system, so don't go looking for that yet. You might need to wait a few days to subscribe to that. But in the decision associated with this rulemaking, the commission, the decision indicates that the commission anticipates that this proceeding will also consider among several items. Specifically, it will consider establishing policies and programs to advance demand flexibility pursuant to the strategies identified in the demand flexibility white paper or by a working group. And elsewhere in the decision, the decision actually calls out the 6 specific strategies that are described in the demand flexibility white paper as a basis for enabling widespread adoption of demand flexibility solutions. So at least on a preliminary basis, the CalFuse proposal is in scope of the proceeding, subject to a final scoping memo to be issued later in the rulemaking. The preliminary scoping memo also includes about, I think, 12 or 13 preliminary issues. And so part of the purpose of this workshop is to make you aware of this rulemaking and encourage you to participate in the proceeding and offer comments. And the comments actually are due within 30 days of the effective date of the rulemaking. So that's likely to be about the third week of August, depending on when the actual decision is approved and released. So I guess I would like to now, so at this point, both of the, both recommendations in the executive summary have already been addressed by the commission, it appears. So that's encouraging. So let me then move on to set up the staff presentation that you're about to hear about. I'd like to, whenever we take on some policy initiatives, I'd like to put things in context of a strategic framework in terms of, how the policy ideas that are being discussed here relate to the larger policy framework in California. And if you spend time on our website, the CPUC website, I think you'll find somewhere that the core mission of the commission is to make sure that people in California have access to safe, reliable power that is affordable and clean. While that is the mission, I guess my observation is that there are certain macro forces that are driving the policies that are designed to achieve these objectives. And at a high level, these macro forces could be probably summarized in these two, the 4 categories that I'm showing here: grid modernization, also known as smart grid, the overriding objective here in California to reduce emissions as rapidly as possible, finally achieving net zero by 2045. Customer choice and equity is an increasingly important consideration driving a lot of our policies. And then more recently, climate adaptation has taken on urgency and increased importance. So, depending on the policy initiative, different forces appear to be at play. Wildfire mitigation, resiliency are sort of examples of policy initiatives that are being driven largely by climate adaptation. Most of the demand side policies, including demand response, I think are really being shaped by 3 of these factors, as in smart grid, the goal to reduce emissions, as well as the desire to offer choice to customers and achieve some equity in the process. So let's just drill into the emission reductions a little bit further. If you look at a variety of modeling studies that have been done on how to achieve net zero such as the WWS studies by Stanford, Lawrence Berkeley modeling studies, even our own integrated resources planning processes at the Commission, you see three strategies played a prominent role in achieving net zero. One is decarbonizing the power supply. The second is electrifying as many end users as possible, as quickly as possible, and then also striving for as much as maximizing the demand reduction through energy efficiency as much as possible, because it is simply just challenging to build the supply infrastructure and the delivery infrastructure to keep up with, if you don't constrain the overall demand growth to some level. So I think, but going forward, we should elevate another strategy to an equal footing. This is my suggestion, and that is focusing on demand flexibility and have that play a more prominent role in our longer term modeling and studies. And so that's our focus today, is to talk about how we can scale demand flexibility as much as possible with the motivation being that it helps improve reliability in the system. It helps accelerate our progress to achieving net zero, and it goes a long way in trying to minimize the cost of service in the context of the increasing stress that might be put on the system through electrification as well as higher renewable penetrations on the supply side. So today, in the next 2 hours, you will hear our CalFuse proposal being discussed at some length. So once again, you'll hear this over and over. The focus of this proposal is to enable widespread adoption of demand flexibility solutions. And the basis for this is a three-part policy framework that has been proposed by ED staff, Energy Division staff. And the three-part consists of, one, standardizing the access to prices for customers, devices, and third-party service providers that may be helping customers to manage energy. Secondly, having utilities offer dynamic electricity prices that are linked to real-time grid conditions and economics, the grid economics. And then lastly, the third pillar is to offer options to customers to help them manage and optimize their energy usage and bills. So each of these pillars you'll see later is designed to encourage and maximize the adoption of demand flexibility solutions. So with that, actually, I forgot to do something that I typically do when I start workshop, and that is to offer some jokes. So now that I remember, let me try some jokes. And please take a moment to just indulge in that. So here's one. So a wind turbine ran into a solar panel in the street, and the turbine shouted, "Hey, I'm a big fan of yours." That was a very short one. Okay, here's a longer one. Be patient. It might take me a minute or two to describe this. So a wife sent her husband a surprise gift on his birthday. And so the gift arrives via a delivery truck, which dropped an enormous box on the driveway. So the husband rushes out, tears open the box in a hurry, and finds a top-of-the-line Tesla EV on the driveway. So he's now very overjoyed, as you might imagine, and opens the door of the car and sees an iPad on the driver's seat with a message taped to it. And the message said, "Turn me on first." So he turns on the tablet. And then on the screen of the tablet, he sees a smiling picture of Elon Musk with a caption in large letters at the bottom of the screen. The caption says, "Batteries not included." All right, we will transition to Jean. Jean and Achintia will are senior analyst in demand response and retail rate sections. And with that, Andrew, could you please take over the screen and introduce Jean?
Hi, I can introduce myself. I'm Jean Lamming from the Demand Response Team and Energy Division, and I'm going to take you through the first part of the white paper, which is the staff's projection of the need for what's proposed there, the vision, and then the first two elements in what is a six-part framework that Alok kind of highlighted already. And then I'll take some clarifying questions, and we'll have a quick break. And I'll turn it over to Achintia Maduri, my partner in the retail rates section, who will go through the last four elements in the six-part framework. And I want to say that work on this staff proposal actually started back in 2019 when my supervisor Alok was musing about how to increase demand flexibility above what we currently have in our portfolio of load modifying and demand side resources. And there were early foundational discussions with CAISO and CEC staff. And when it became clear that the vehicle for this demand flexibility Alok was envisioning would be in the form of an economic price signal tied to real-time costs of the grid, we teamed up with the retail rates team, and you'll see in the white paper in the proposal, much of it is about the rate making and rate reform that ties customer costs to what's really happening on the grid. And as momentum built on this, and Alok started building out a PowerPoint, we started talking to more market actors and got input from many of them. And then we hit the summer of 2020. And if you were in California, you remember we had heat storms and grid reliability problems, and everything stopped as far as this white paper work because the commission kicked off a two-phase summer reliability proceeding, and there was a lot of scrambling and work to do on that. But today, I have to say, I personally am really excited by how the elements of the staff proposal align with and intersect work that's happening now at the California Energy Commission, just really hand in glove, all to support the transition to clean energy and a reliable grid. And so it's pretty exciting. And if you go to the next slide, you can see at a high level what's proposed here. The staff propose a strategy to promote widespread demand flexibility by making the real-time price of electricity available to every customer, regardless of their location, just throughout the state. From a policy point of view, it's seeking to balance the landmark state clean energy initiatives with the need for grid reliability. And as Alok already said, the specific agenda here is to improve demand side resource management by harnessing the electrification of building end uses and electric vehicles, the proliferation of behind the meter batteries and storage, all to address grid challenges. And the next slide outlines three of the main grid challenges. And you can see these are all exacerbated by the extreme heat waves and drought that we're facing here in California. And in terms of increasing renewables penetration, that is coming along with increased curtailment, steeper ramps, increased reliance on the intermittent wind and solar, use-limited resources like demand response and battery storage, which create reliability challenges. And I just want to highlight something from the white paper about renewables penetration and curtailment. In 2020, the average daily curtailment was about 4.3 gigawatt hours per day, and it's projected to increase to about 15 gigawatt hours per day by 2030. And then we can move to look at increasing electrification of end uses, building decarbonization, as well as of transportation, which, if unmanaged, this increased load can again cause problems. And again, I'll quote from the white paper, which cites a 2021 CEC staff report that projects that by 2030, light-duty electric vehicles, and this is just light-duty, not medium or heavy-duty vehicles, will be charging about 5.5 gigawatts at midnight on a typical weekday, increasing demand by 25%, which just highlights again the need to align this charging and other electric end use, electricity use with renewable generation. And then last is the challenges of increasing behind the meter batteries and solar if unmanaged. So if you go to the next slide, you can see that these challenges, if looked at another way, are a massive potential and opportunity if they're flexible and managed. These projections are based on about 2020 or 2021, projecting to 2030. So a doubling of rooftop solar, big growth in behind the meter storage. And I want to call out the transportation electrification, the projection of 5 million electric vehicles with about 250 gigawatt hours of just technical potential of raw storage ability. Of course, not every customer is going to want to provide a grid service, but just that raw potential is about 4 times the 60 gigawatt hours that's projected for utility scale storage to be online by 2030. So you can just see that manifesting in all of those customer electric vehicles is a potential opportunity that's just massive. And the same with building decarbonization and the new electrifying end uses like heat pump water heaters, the thermal storage opportunity there, and in the ability to preheat and pre-cool buildings with electricity, again, could greatly outpace the 60 gigawatt hours of battery storage that the utilities are projected to have by 2030, just because of the sheer number of customers that will have these end uses. So, and this all depends on their flexibility. And then the next slide, we're going to look at current approaches. This is our current portfolio of load flexibility options. It's really mostly the first 2 pathways, load modifying and supply side. The commission did have an effort for distribution level DR, but it hasn't manifested at this time to a great degree. So in terms of load modifying, there's a great number of rates that have proliferated. And I want to dip into chapter 3 of the white paper to kind of highlight some of the challenges and barriers that are listed there for both of these pathways. In terms of load modifying, there's a large number of rates of specialty rates, boutique rates like for electric vehicles, and it can be administratively burdensome and confusing to customers to have all of these different options. And there's other load serving entities in the state like CCAs that are making their own rates that add to this. And at the commission, most of the current retail rates do not reflect the current real-time locational cost of energy or grid conditions, which can lead to customers using electricity in ways that aren't efficient or economic or good for the grid. And then time of use rates have become ubiquitous, and the way they're designed by 2 or 3 time blocks a day is actually quite a blunt instrument for reflecting grid conditions and doesn't help maximize or incentivize customers' efficient response. And the white paper cites a 2019 analysis of SDG&E TOU prices, or I'm sorry, just SDG&E prices by the joint advance rate parties that showed that 57% of the highest price intervals for wholesale energy prices actually fell outside the peak TOU period. So that just shows some of the inefficiencies and challenges in the current rate designs. And then on the supply side, DR side, I have to just acknowledge that there's been a tremendous amount of work that has gone into integrating these many programs into the CAISO wholesale or the CAISO market in the last several years. And these are economic and emergency programs that are very important, and there's no element of this proposal that recommends any kind of scaling back or changing them. But there are a number of barriers and difficulties that are identified in Chapter 3 of the white paper that come with these programs. For instance, there are many of them, and they offer different incentives and have different rules across them, and they operate under different administrative vehicles, which can be complex and difficult to manage. They often have high costs associated with them, and I'll just toss out a few examples. To operate one of these programs requires a scheduling coordinator, registration of the resource aggregation within the CAISO within a particular sublab. The operator has to obtain customer authorization for the utility to release customer data, and that data is then used for settlement of customer performance. There's load impact studies required every year to justify resource qualifying capacity. There can also be a misalignment between the needs of the grid and the customer's expectations and comfort level. Oftentimes, the payments that are associated with program dispatches aren't enough of an incentive to support ongoing customer participation in events. I think the utilities like to call this when a customer is hot and dark. It can just be inconvenient to be in a demand response supply side program at times. And this can lead to the operators of the programs bidding the prices high into the CAISO market, so customers aren't inconvenienced by frequent dispatches, which can lead to customers leaving the program and a smaller resource. So that's just an inherent conflict of interest there in the design. There's also limited flexibility. These programs are focused on load shed during the 30 to 60 highest priced hours of the year, which is of course very important. But the white paper recognizes that the future grid needs something of a 87-60 flexibility, not just in the form of shed, but also in the form of load taking and load shifting, and at much bigger scale. And we talked about distribution level DR, so we can go to the next slide, which looks at the future. And the white paper here is really proposing to build off these three current pathways and to focus on that single standardized price signal for a simpler, less expensive, and more scalable option. And this focused option would include distribution level DR in the form of a dynamic distribution capacity charge based on time and location, which is an element that Achincia is going to address a little later. And I also want to just touch on the reduced cost of controls here. The white paper is built on the idea that control costs will come down, and it's the hope that as there's more uptake of demand flexibility solutions and more need for controls and more use of them, the cost will start to drop and enable more flexibility, more uptake. And it could be kind of a virtuous cycle. As there's more use of controls, hopefully they will become easy and cheap for customers to access. And the next slide is kind of encapsulates the vision of CalFuse. of these price signals going out to electric vehicles, batteries, heat pump water heaters, air conditioning thermostats, and then the cascade of benefits that comes from customers responding and flexing the load. And I really want to channel here the comments of Commissioner Andrew McAllister, who's actually a commissioner at the California Energy Commission. I heard him speak on Tuesday morning, and he described this vision so well. And he was actually introducing a workshop on a complementary proposal at the California Energy Commission that involves updates to pool pump control standards to help pool pumps be able to operate during periods of high renewable generations and not during peak load times. And pool pumps are the first in a series of appliances that the Energy Commission has in a pipeline that they're proposing to update control standards for. So Commissioner McAllister was talking about the need for electricity demand to flex to meet the intermittent generation. And I think this is a great concept that historically, and I've heard Commissioner Houck say this also, that historically it was supply that always met demand. But here we're really flipping the tables and saying that because we have this intermittent clean energy supply, it's demand that needs to flex to meet supply. And Commissioner McAllister said that load flexibility can replace the need for new infrastructure, create reliability at less cost and with less carbon. And I think he was, in my mind, he was addressing the middle of this slide where there's all these different end uses. And he said, just imagine millions of flexible demand appliances that are manageable and grid interactive and can be reached at the device level or through facilitated aggregation to provide this needed demand flexibility. And then he addressed something that's in another initiative at the CEC that is also complementary, and that's the CEC's proposal for a market-informed demand automation server, or MIDAS, and that is a rates platform that could broadcast these price signals out statewide. And that's actually the first pillar and the first element in our staff proposal. And the idea for MIDAS actually came from discussions early on between Energy Commission and Energy Division staff. And the Energy Commission took that ball and ran with it and added a lot of bells and whistles in the form of rate identification numbers and really built out that idea. But if we go to the next slide, you can see here we'll start the CalFuse proposal. So the next slide introduces the three elements that Alok, the three pillars that Alok talked about. And the first is price presentation. And this is a MIDAS-like idea for a statewide standardized price presentation to customers, devices, or authorized third parties. The second bucket is comprehensive retail rate reforms linked to real-time grid conditions and economics. And then the third part of it is customer options to manage their energy use and bill. And the next slide maps out, I believe, it shows how the three pillars map into the 6 elements of the staff proposal. The standardized price access, real-time energy prices, real-time capacity prices, bidirectional prices, and 2 subscription options. And then the next slide takes a little deeper look, I believe, at the 6 elements. So that first one is kind of what I think of as kind of an infrastructure or IT element that's like MIDAS with a standardized universal statewide access to the current electricity price. And then the second aspect is passing through to that portal, the real-time wholesale energy cost. And then element 3 gets into dynamic capacity charges based on real-time grid conditions, which could really be a big part of the cost in that price signal. distribution and generation capacity costs. And then transition to bidirectional prices, which would be symmetrical and could address, for instance, a battery charging and discharging at the same price. And then a basic subscription option and an advanced one, which would help customers manage bill volatility while still allowing them to capitalize on low price periods to reduce their bills. And then the next slide takes a look at element 1, this infrastructure piece of a standardized price signal. And the staff report really recognizes that in order for there to be widespread demand flexibility, there has to be widespread access throughout the land to this price signal for anybody to grab and be able to respond to. And actually, my supervisor, Alok, discovered that this is not available. He tried to find the cost of electricity in real time and a forecast for his home. And he looked at his utility online account and thought he would see it there. And when he didn't, he Googled it and he thought he would find it somewhere on the web. He thought there might be a phone app that would give it to him, kind of like you can find your weather forecast. And it just wasn't available. So the idea here is an internet-based portal that provides real-time forecasted electricity price for each customer, regardless of their electricity provider, their rate, their location, and it will be updated at least hourly. And again, this is Midas or something like Midas. And if you go to the next slide, it shows what's sort of the brains behind this price portal, and the white paper refers to it as the price machine. And if you look in the lower left-hand part of the slide, you can see that the price machine would start to combine what we consider the standardized parts of this price signal. And that would make a composite signal. It would combine at least two of these. You can see here the utility distribution cost and the load serving entity cost. And it's really important that the price machine can kind of mix and match these parts as needed, because it would allow, that flexibility would allow a utility bundled customer to participate from an investor-owned utility, or a CCA customer who needs the utility distribution cost factored in separately, or a publicly owned utility to participate, their customers. And this is, again, really important for scale of demand flexibility, because there are so many load serving entities in California. There's something like 70 now, and they're growing in number. So this flexible architecture is very important. And then if you go to the next slide, this is somewhat of a shout out to third parties and that whole ecosystem of different business models and approaches, trained at different customer sectors. The white paper really recognizes that once that price is easy to discover, there needs to be, third parties may need to step in to bridge any gap between the price and a device responding, or an aggregator of storage responding, or someone who's managing electric vehicle fleets, or some intelligent algorithm that's coordinating end uses within a building. There's so many different applications and approaches, and the white paper wants to make sure that any customer could participate, even those who aren't early adopters. So there's a lot of room for third-party sector to support this. And I think the next slide, let's see if that's a look at questions. So the white paper doesn't answer every question. It actually proposes questions for stakeholders. And if this proposal is picked up by a proceeding at the commission, perhaps some of these questions could be answered by stakeholders there. So in terms of element 1, there are questions like, how would this be developed? This price platform, in what time frame. These aren't time sequential. We're looking for input on, which element here should be done first or second or concurrently. Should the price portal be available to all load serving entities in the state? And in terms of the price machine, how should that be developed? Who should operate it and maintain it? How many price machines should there be? So there's a number of questions there. And then the next slide is about element 2, which is the dynamic prices based on real-time wholesale cost. And the next slide is a little deeper look at that. So if you look at the lower left-hand corner here again, this price machine, the brains behind the price portal, would make a composite price of the utility distribution system cost, load serving entity cost, as well as the CAISO marginal price, the locational marginal price. And I think the next slide shows some of the benefits of that. The locational marginal price reflects CAISO market conditions, which is the beginning of encouraging customers to shift load by reflecting the grid economics, as well as other price elements that Achinthia is going to talk about a little later. And then there's the cascading effects of load shift, reducing curtailment, helping with the evening ramp, with emissions, enhancing reliability, reducing energy procurement costs for customers, reducing customer bills. And these are really societal benefits that anyone can enjoy, even if they're not opting into this dynamic rate idea. And again, this locational marginal price element reflected in that economic signal complements a proposal that's pending at the California Energy Commission now, which is part of their load standards update proposal, along with that MIDAS platform. And in that proposal, the CEC would ask many load serving entities in the state to consider offering locational marginal price based rates updated at least hourly to all of their customers. And that proposal, along with MIDAS, goes before the Energy Commission for a vote next month. And I think the next slide is questions for stakeholders. Again, this would be about element 2. In terms of that locational marginal price, what time and geographic granularity should be used to form that price? Should it be the CAISO's day ahead hourly market or 15-minute market? Should it be a price node geographic base or default load aggregation point or some other? So those are open questions. And I think we could pause here for clarifying questions if there are any. Andrew, has anything come in on the chat?
I haven't seen any clarifying questions for you come in on the chat as of now. If anyone wants to put in any clarifying questions before we take a short break.
They can also raise their hands and maybe take the mic.
Right. I see a question from David Myers at Polaris about longer ahead prices. More than, I think, probably more than 24-hour ahead. And I think that's an open question that could be considered if this is taken up in a proceeding. Alok, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I think Cynthia can also address that as part of his conversation.
Great.
To different elements. So
Okay.
For that. Did anybody raise their hand, Andrew?
I haven't seen any. Oh, yes, we have one raised hand from Keith Moffat. I am sending you a request to unmute, so you should be able to unmute yourself.
The question in the chat as well. The question is if the CPUC is considering spatial granularity smaller than transmission LMP nodes, because I believe at the current moment that's the smallest spatial granularity that we have for prices. But there are constraints that could exist, particularly in utility regions that are on a smaller granularity spatially.
So the short answer right now is that this is a staff proposal, and the granularity, the spatial granularity, is an open question. Is posed in the white paper. It is something I think the commission should take up in the rulemaking and develop a record on based on stakeholder input, and arrive at some resolution on what is the appropriate level of geographical resolution. It not only applies to element 2, but this is a question that also applies to the capacity charges in element 3, as you will see when Achinte comes up. And it's also possible that the granularity might change over time as sophistication increases. So that's an open question.
We have another question from Claire Broom asking about the component of transmission infrastructure costs. Will that be included in the price signal?
Achinte, you want to say something about that?
I think this is a bit of a tricky one because transmission cost is outside of the CPUC jurisdiction. CPUCs could certainly be an intervener in FERC transmission cases that suggests a certain type of transmission cost, but that isn't part of the decision-making authority when it comes to utility rates. So the staff proposal notes this and provides, suggests that this is something that, again, merits stakeholder deliberation.
Thank you. And I have a raised hand from Brad Hebner, and I'm giving you the ability to unmute yourself.
I'm sure you've reviewed this settlement in the PG&E GRC for real-time pricing that does pass through CAISO energy prices. It is pending before the commission with a PD that would approve it. Would you consider that structure to fulfill this element?
Yeah, I think later on we address the ongoing IOU pilots or approved IOU pilots, and yes, that settlement agreement has many elements or has a few elements that are aligned with the CalFuse proposal. So yes, I think parts of that settlement and parts of that proposal are certainly aligned with what staff has proposed as a CalFuse framework. But I will note that CalFuse framework goes beyond what has been what's in the settlement agreement for that application.
For the other 6 steps, certainly, but on the energy prices, it is territory wide rather than
right.
A small geographic area. But other than that difference, I'm just curious if on the element 2, it is really it really fulfills what you're thinking.
Right, and I think in the staff white paper, it's laid out that a territory-wide price could be a good starting point, but there could be benefits to being more granular. And I think this, again, is something that merits deliberation among stakeholders, and there could be a stepwise process by which the prices that are offered or the linkages to the market are tweaked to meet more advanced objectives.
Thank you.
This is Paul Phillips, just jumping in to answer Brad as well, and say that the pilots that we are setting up, not just PG&E but the other IOUs as well, are not intended to be necessarily replicas or perfect harmonization with the CalFuse framework. They are good proxies for them for now, but we will likely take the results of those pilots over the next year or two and make the necessary tweaks depending on what comes out of the rulemaking as well. We're not going to speak to a lot of those particular nuances, but just letting you know that while that provides a nice baseline and a nice foundation, that's not necessarily what we'll end up with as far as like the CalFuse framework is concerned.
I do notice there is a question in the chat box from Mark Costa. I just wanted to acknowledge that question and so does not appear that we're ignoring it. I think it's probably better addressed after Cynthia covers his portion, and then we can come back to this equity question.
And I saw a question pop up about Midas and if there's concerns in the white paper about using Midas, and I'm sorry for any confusion about that. If I said, you know, a Midas-like, or it's just that would be a decision the commission would have to make if it takes up this proposal in a proceeding. It would have to decide whether to use Midas or something else. It's our proposal as staff, but you know, to have a platform like that, but we can't make a decision like that at a staff level.
And we have one more raised hand from Ed Levine. So I'm giving you the ability to unmute now.
A potential subscription capability for some tariffs. Do you have any indication when that type of activity might be available? You know, we work with a company that is an extremely large consumer of electricity that does have the ability to increase production or consumption certain hours of the day, then reduce it at certain hours of the day, but are constricted by the demand charges. So, you know, under the subscription strategy where they would contribute a similar amount, they would be able to consume more when the grid is in abundance and reduce in that 5 to 9 period if available. So we're a big supporter of this. This is many dozens of megawatts that we're talking about through multiple territories. So, you know, I'm trying to get a little indication when that might be available.
Yeah, I mean, I will touch more about this later on, but I can say that one of the CalFuse pilots that's been authorized is a pilot in Southern California, Edison territory, and that is a full-featured CalFuse pilot, which includes the subscription option as defined in the staff paper. So that could be a potential option for customers within Edison's territory.
Excellent, thank you.
I see another question here from Deborah Bells. And it seems like this is a question about interaction of staff proposal with requirements to develop fixed charges under AB 205. So again, I think this probably should wait until Cynthia talks about the different rate designs, and I think he also plans to address fixed cost recovery. So we'll wait on that. Any other question in the chat room that we have missed?
There's a couple of questions relating to the technology needs and equity concerns related to technology needs. I think those also merit a longer discussion later on, and I just wanted to acknowledge those questions, and then we will come back to them.
Should we take a break?
Just as a reminder to all attendees that this early section is just mostly clarifying questions. We will have plenty of time for Q&A and for discussion later. But yeah, if we're ready to take a 5-minute break, is that what we're feeling?
I think so.
All right. So I'll ask everyone be back at 10:40, and we will see you all then. All right, welcome back, everyone. I am now going to pass off the second part of this morning's presentation to Achintia. Take it away.
Thank you, Andrew, and thanks everyone for being here. My name is Achintia Maduri. I'm a senior analyst with the retail rates section, and I'll continue on from where Jean Lamming left off. So the next element of the CalFuse proposal suggests that dynamic capacity charges should be incorporated into prices, and that these should be based on real-time grid utilization. So next slide, please. The second element of the CalFuse proposal addresses energy costs and can also address energy losses by tying those to the CAISO wholesale market price. However, there is a large segment of utility costs, especially in generation and distribution categories, which is related to capacity or infrastructure. It's worth noting and differentiating between marginal costs and non-marginal costs. In general, marginal costs represent the cost for adding future capacity, and this is driven by load that increases peak demand or load that is not aligned with available existing infrastructure capacity. The non-marginal costs can be considered costs associated with existing infrastructure. The third element of the CalFuse proposal recommends that capacity prices with generation and distribution infrastructure be dynamic and linked directly to utilization and be volumetric. That is, that they should not be based on individual customer factors, such as the peak customer demand during a billing period, such as monthly demand charges, and that these prices should incentivize usage when it benefits both the generation and distribution system and will reduce long-term infrastructure costs by deferring the need or reducing the need for future system upgrades. In the next slide, the staff paper goes through some of the issues with the current approach to capacity cost recovery. Currently, non-residential customers predominantly pay demand charges based on a peak load during a billing period. Residential customers pay volumetric prices for capacity costs, and these could be time differentiated, but are not explicitly linked with utilization, and has been highlighted in stakeholder testimonies, as Jean mentioned, can be misaligned with when capacity is actually most constrained. The issues with the current approach that the staff paper identifies is that demand charges often encourage non-economic behavior. Well, they encourage economic behavior from a customer's perspective, but they don't often align with what would reduce long-term system costs. There isn't an effective signal to reduce peak system demand. And this misalignment between supply and demand can lead to increases in cost of service. So the staff proposal lays out a recommendation for hourly capacity charges that recover the cost for fixed capacity costs, and that these capacity charges should recover for distribution capacity costs, the generation capacity costs, which are an LSE's load serving entities resource adequacy obligation, and the ramping capacity costs, which are a load serving entities flexible resource adequacy obligation. The staff proposal suggests that the types of prices that are used for capacity recovery should be scarcity prices. The concept of scarcity pricing it suggests that more fixed costs should be recovered as system utilization increases, and that these costs should be directly linked to system utilization. And the staff paper also lays out that the prices should be based and should be scaled to collect the long-run marginal cost of adding capacity, with the goal to directly provide a signal that incentivizes long-run infrastructure costs. In the white paper and in this presentation, we illustrate a quadratic relationship between capacity utilization and price. I will note that that there could be other other functional relationship between utilization and price that could be considered more appropriate. It's just worth talking through this one for the purposes of this presentation, but staff recommends that there be a lengthy stakeholder discussion on the types of functions that would be most appropriate. And these functions may indeed be different for different customer classes. I can talk more about that later. Next slide, please. So to give an example for what scarcity pricing for capacity costs would look like, this slide presents data of the price curves that were implemented for the SCE TMIX rates pilot. This was a CEC-funded pilot that was conducted from 2016 to 2019. To give a preview, this is one of the pilots that's been reauthorized by the Commission for phase 2, and I'll talk more about that later on. But in this presentation, there were three, the scarcity prices were used to collect for delivery, generation, and flexible generation. The way that these prices were scaled was that the revenue, which is the sum product of a test year's worth of hourly load data and the hourly price, were used to calculate an annual revenue, and that those revenues were scaled to recover the appropriate revenues, which is the same as the otherwise applicable tariff for each section of the system. In the case of generation and flexible generation, this is the system-wide. This is a system-wide number. But for delivery price, which is the distribution capacity, different sections of the system could have different delivery functions because the load at different segments of the distribution system would indeed be different. And in the rates pilot, it was concentrated at one substation in Edison's territory. The staff white paper recommends that at least starting out with the substation as the atomic unit, if you will, for what delivery prices are based on, what distribution prices are based on. But it could be more granular. It could be at a feeder circuit level as well. But in each of those elements, it would the staff white paper suggests that the section of each each independent section be the revenues be scaled, the prices be scaled so that the revenues are the same as the otherwise applicable tariff. So each of these component capacity price functions generates a price or results in a price that is based on a load forecast. So for instance, the day ahead forecast would provide prices for each of those components based on the day ahead demand at the system level, the day ahead forecasted load ramp, and the day ahead forecasted demand at the substation level. And the price machine that was introduced by Gene in element 1 would be responsible for computing the composite price, which is a combination of the capacity elements and the locational marginal price. So if you look to the next slide, this slide lays out what the incorporation of real-time grid utilization looks like. This real-time grid utilization, both from the utility distribution company in terms of circuit load data, as well as the LSC's net load and the net load ramp, is being used to inform the individual capacity component prices. And the composite customer-specific price is then is sent to the price portal for customers to respond to. The staff proposal recommends starting out with hourly capacity prices based on the day-ahead forecast, but there could be more granularity depending as the proposal is implemented or as policy choices dictate. So looking at the next slide, I wanted to present an example of a composite price that has various capacity elements in addition to the locational marginal price looks like. This again is data, price data based on the rates pilot, which also included universal devices, and as has been mentioned in the chat. And the composite prices in this case are different based on the underlying conditions that drive those prices. So in this case, on a winter day, it's the flexible generation capacity, the scarcity of flexible generation, that's driving the overall price the peak price is a function of the need for ramping resources to meet the fall off of solar generation and increased evening ramp. Whereas on a summer day, it's the base generation price, overall capacity constraints that drive the price itself. And again, just to showcase in this example, the capacity elements indeed can be a large segment of the overall price. And it's important to ensure that those prices are appropriately captured and appropriately linked to system utilization to ensure that the right signal is provided to incentivize demand flexibility that's complementary to saving long-term infrastructure costs. Next slide, please. The objectives that are achieved via these hourly capacity prices, I've mentioned these along the way, but just to recap, these prices, these hourly capacity prices linked to utilization encourage load shift that is complementary to grid-based economics. They shift the fixed cost recovery burden onto the load, driving high system utilization and capacity upgrades. They can ensure the full recovery of a utility's revenue requirements. As I mentioned, prices can be scaled to recover the same revenue as the otherwise applicable tariffs for various segments of the distribution system. This ensures fairness across the service territory. I mean, I'll just note that this is how prices are done right now. Even if different segments of the distribution system are closer to the need for a service upgrade, those customers pay the same price as other customers across UDC's territory. There could be a policy decision made later on that tweaks prices in such a way that encourages long-term investments, behind the meter investments in territories or in parts of the distribution system that are in more need of capacity. But the staff proposal recommends as a starting point to use the same approach as the status quo to ensure a modicum of equity. This approach also minimizes long-term infrastructure costs and allows for flexible rate design options to reflect policy choices. And what I mean by that is that different cost allocations and recovery options could be considered by different customer classes. The fundamental shape of the scarcity prices could be different for different customer classes. And there are more frequent and granular updates to the prices to stabilize revenues and incorporate efficiency gains and demand flexibility, and the efficiency gains from demand flexibility into rates. So this approach allows for more frequent, say annular updates into what the impact of demand flexibility is into the rates and allow the benefits to accrue to a wider set of customers. I see a question regarding how generation capacity cost is blended with the delivery capacity cost when the load serving entity and the utility distribution company are different entities. And that I think is an open question. So if we look at the next slide. I guess it's not listed here, but in the white paper, it is defined as an open question. I mean, there has to be an implementation agreement between load serving entities and utility distribution companies with regards to which entity, for instance, hosts the price machine and is responsible for creating a composite price. And also some of the other implementation questions that were identified in the white paper include what geographical scope should be used for the localized infrastructure. As I've indicated, the staff proposal recommends starting out with a substation for distribution costs, but it could be made more granular depending on the utility distribution companies and other stakeholders' feedback. The second question relates to whether all fixed costs should be recovered via dynamic volumetric prices or only the marginal generation and distribution capacity costs. The staff proposal recommends that those capacity costs be scaled to recover all marginal generation and distribution costs, but other costs could be blended into the scarcity price functions. There could be other scarcity price functions based on different load profiles or different utilization profiles used for recovering other costs. This again is a policy decision. And also whether the scarcity price curve should be customer class specific. So for instance, should the shape, the steepness of the curves, the type of polynomial function that's used be different for different customer classes. This would allow, for instance, less sophisticated customers to participate with prices that are perhaps less aggressive in their relationship between utilization and price. So it's a question that merits open discussion. So I'll move on to the next slide, which transitions to element 4 of the CalFuse proposal, which recommends a transition to bidirectional prices. So next slide, please. The reason that the staff white paper recommends symmetric bidirectional prices is that this approach simplifies the economic value. It allows for easily discoverable, transparent, and predictable economic value for all DERs. It simplifies DER valuation and operations. And a symmetric price allows for the distribution and economically driven self-dispatch of DERs. The staff white paper lays out that having a symmetric price removes the need for the supervisory control and coordination of all the behind-the-meter devices at a single customer site, because the price is the same regardless of whether the customer is a net importer or a net exporter. The price does not depend on the scheduling decisions of other devices. And so the staff white paper presents that symmetric prices can allow for demand flexibility to scale more easily through a symmetric price signal. Furthermore, scarcity prices ensure that the export prices are linked to cost causation. So this reduces unintended cost shifts from different customer segments and different customer technologies. This can improve monetization of DER services to the grid, both on a locational and temporal level, with a transparent capacity value of exports to the distribution system. And lastly, this approach can enable full vehicle-to-grid integration. Mobile storage, which has been highlighted earlier in the presentation as being a very significant potential resource, can be used to effectively enhance grid resiliency. An example of this would be the seasonal use of electrified school buses to help summer reliability needs. So looking at the next slide, the staff white paper included an analysis of energy storage dispatch, and this analysis looked at a comparison for a residential load and a commercial load in Edison territory, which was dispatched in response to TOU rates versus the CalFuse price signal. I'll note that again, the price signal that was used here corresponded to the rates pilot project, and as such differs slightly from what is described in the white paper itself. But nonetheless, the trends are pretty significant and are worth highlighting here. As a top line result, both bill and GHG emissions reductions are significantly higher with response to a CalFuse signal. And it's worth really honing in on the GHG emissions impact when storage dispatch is optimized with respect to the CalFuse signal as opposed to a standard TOU rate. For a residential customer, there is both an annual as well as a per cycle improvement for GHG emissions. And for commercial customers, this effect is even more dramatic, again, because a lot of commercial customers with non-coincident demand charges have energy dispatch optimization that is geared at reducing customer peak load, whereas when responding to the CalFuse signal, GHG emissions are much more effectively reduced. So there was a question earlier about incorporating GHG emission signals as a separate stream of information. But what the staff proposal highlights is that the CalFuse signal as proposed does a very effective job of maximizing GHG emissions, especially for storage dispatch. So moving on to the next slide. One of the key questions that was highlighted for bidirectional prices are whether existing customer data access policies, systems, and processes, which in conjunction with element 1, the price portal, are adequate to allow third-party service providers of behind-the-meter DERs and automated energy management tools to fully leverage the CalFuse signal and maximize customer benefits. So I noticed that there was a question regarding customer data access policies earlier in the chat, and I think this merits further discussion later on in the afternoon. So we can move on to the next slide. So now we transition from the rate reform proposals that are part of the CalFuse framework to the customer subscription optionality that is part of the CalFuse framework. So the first element of the customer optionality part of the framework is a recommendation to offer a subscription option, which is based on historical load shape and energy quantity at the otherwise applicable tariff price. So next slide, please. It's important to note that what staff proposes as a subscription is very specific. It's a customer-specific baseline usage that is based directly on customers' history and energy quantity, which is offered at the otherwise applicable tariff price. This is viewed as a stabilizing element, a hedge for both customers and utilities to complement the transition to dynamic rates. It's worth highlighting that subscriptions can mean a lot of things. Staff is not proposing, nor does staff support an all-you-can-eat subscription for energy. That's not what the baseline subscription option described in the white paper is intending to achieve. And subscriptions have also been used to describe demand charge subscriptions, which is a different mechanism. And that too is not what is being described here. So as part of the staff proposal, what is being described is a customer-specific or customer class-specific load shape that is tied to historical usage. So for instance, this could be based on a customer's average monthly bill based on the past few years of data. And what it allows is that it allows customers to pre-purchase this baseline quantity at the otherwise applicable tariff price, but it still presents an opportunity to fully respond to the dynamic price. So how it works is that any customer is able to pre-purchase their baseline usage, and then any quantity in a particular hour that is in excess of the pre-subscribed amount is settled at the real-time price. Similarly, any amount of energy that is used less than the customer's subscription quantity would be credited to the customer at the dynamic rate. So any decision on optimizing response to the real-time price is not impacted by a customer's subscription. It is fully complementary to demand flexibility that is encouraged through a dynamic price. It just allows for a backstop for all customers to address any extreme events that could cause bills to be dramatically different from the otherwise applicable tariff price. The options for subscriptions that are laid out for different customers include customer specific, so based directly on a customer's individual load profile over the past few years, but they could also be class average, they could be climate zone weighted, and these would merit robust stakeholder discussion through a proceeding and a workshop process, or working group process. So looking at the next slide, please. The benefits of customer, I see some questions. There are some questions about the cost of the baseline subscriptions. And again, this highlighting that this is an initial proposal from staff. We certainly consider other options for what the subscription cost should be based on. And from an implementation standpoint, how would the subscription delta be settled for the customer? I mean, I think the idea is that if a customer uses the same amount of energy roughly as their subscription, then their bill is the subscription bill. If they use any more or less energy during any particular hour, that's credited or debited from the customer account, and the bill is updated at the end of the month. So it's an initial starting position or a hedge. The benefits of customer baseline subscriptions include protection for customers. It protects against excess bill volatility. It eases customer transitions. Non-responsive customers would end up paying similar bills. So there isn't a moral hazard for customers that are not sophisticated enough to respond to dynamic rates and then face extreme bills as a result of not being able to respond. But from a flexibility standpoint, it fully encourages opportunistic load shift that is complementary to grid economics, as has been highlighted in the rate reform elements of the dynamic price. And it also accommodates changes in demand. Customers can purchase new DERs, and the subscriptions could be updated, or the usage of the new DERs would be complementary to what's part of their subscribed amount. And it allows for predictability. The use of subscriptions can stabilize revenue recovery for distribution operators and load serving entities. I want to note that the way that that subscriptions are defined and described in the staff paper have been successfully implemented for Georgia Power's RTP tariffs, which have been offered since the early 1990s. So this has been the approach that has been used quite successfully, especially by large customers. It's building on work that has been done and implemented for quite some time. We'll go to the next slide, please. So I think it's worth looking at what the various fixed cost recovery options are under a CalFuse framework. As has been described, the energy costs and marginal capacity costs are meant to be recovered through volumetric locational marginal price and volumetric scarcity prices, as has been described in elements 2 and elements 3. This still leaves elements of non-marginal capacity costs and miscellaneous programmatic costs. And the CalFuse framework offers a lot of optionality in how those costs could be recovered. As I've described, these costs could be embedded in the baseline subscriptions based on customers' historical usage. They could also be volumetric and be recovered through scarcity-based prices to further enhance demand flexibility, further incentivize load shift that's complementary to grid needs. And they could also be recovered through some form of limited monthly fixed charges. These are all options that are complementary with the CalFuse framework. The staff proposal does not make a particular recommendation, and indeed, these would have to be decided through a commission decision process. So next slide, please. Some of the questions that were identified in relation to subscriptions is the question of how should these baseline subscriptions profiles be updated and revised? For instance, should they be a rolling average of a customer's historical usage? What are the alternative approaches to bill and revenue stabilization that are as dynamic rates are offered at wider scale? So in contrast to the subscription option, for instance, as described by staff in the white paper. And then what too would be the role of third-party energy managers and service providers? How could they be best leveraged to complement baseline subscriptions? And also, what are the best practices that should be considered for educating customers about the price signal and baseline subscriptions? So those are some of the key questions, among others, that were raised in the white paper. Okay, we can move on to the next step. This moves us along to the last element of the CalFuse framework, which is to introduce transactive features, which can be thought of as another form of subscriptions. This is an ability to lock in price in advance. So moving on to the next slide. This approach of offering transactive prices has again been implemented in the rates pilot and will continue to be implemented in the 2 CalFuse pilots that have been authorized by the Commission. The idea behind the Transactive feature as described in this white paper is that there is a platform that allows load-serving entities and utility distribution companies to provide tenders for future purchases of energy based on advanced load forecasts. So for instance, a 7-day ahead forecast of system demand as well as circuit demand could be used to create price tenders, and customers have the option to accept these price tenders, which then allows for them to lock in a low price at a pre-defined quantity at a future date. The advantage to other customers, which I will again describe a little bit more in detail later, is that the use of transactions allows forecasts to be updated. So this is an important stabilizing element that Transactive features can enable. I'll also note that Transactive energy and Transactive features have been widely studied by the national labs, and a recent study by Pacific Northwest National Lab is highlighted in the white paper. I'll go through this a little bit more, which highlights the importance and the benefits of Transactive features. So next slide, please. So the Transactive system is envisioned to be complementary to the dynamic prices. So if the dynamic prices are offered based on the day-ahead load forecast, Transactive prices and Transactive tenders can be offered based on as much as week-ahead forecasts of system and distribution circuit loads. And they're intended to facilitate these forward buy and sell contracts with customers that choose to participate in the Transactive framework. I will again note that all elements of this framework are considered optional, and it's also considered, the staff paper lays out that the CalFuse framework does not call for all customers to be part of a Transactive system immediately. There could be a subset of customers for whom this feature is most appropriate and would make the best participants. And that could be the initial set of customers for whom Transactive features are offered. Next slide, please. It's worth talking a bit about some of the equity considerations in the CalFuse proposal, and the Transactive layer is one part of those equity considerations. As I mentioned, all elements of the CalFuse proposal, at least the types of rates, and certainly the subscriptions and transactions features are considered to be opt-in. So there isn't a default or opt-out recommendation in it for any of these elements. The CalFuse signal can be tailored for low-income customers. There could be different policy decisions made on the types of signals that are offered to different customer segments. As I've mentioned with baseline subscriptions, these provide a hedge against extreme outcomes. And any customer that's on a baseline subscription, even if they do not change their usage relative to their historical profile, would not see dramatic changes in their bill. And certainly with any new technology, early adopters can reduce the cost of service for everyone. They can drive technology cost reductions and enable wider adoption. And specifically to the Transactive layer, there is the benefit of savings being realized by all, including non-participants in the Transactive layer, at least, on a short-term basis. And this can be highlighted through the illustration that's shown on this slide. Under a one-part traditional tariff, there's a demand forecast by which prices are offered or prices are created. All customers pay a high price during a predicted high demand period unless they shift out of it. So if there's a customer A that is willing to respond to the price and able to shift out of the high price period, even though demand has gone down, the customers that still use energy based on the prior demand forecast would pay a higher price. Next slide, please. As a transactive layer can offer a feedback loop from customer demand to the system operator and the utility distribution company with a multi-part tariff, which is enabled with the transactive layer, even if only customer A shifts load from a high demand period, 7 p.m. in this case, to 5 p.m. via an advanced transactions, all customers would pay a reduced price. This is because the demand forecast has been duly updated, and since prices are based on demand under the CalFuse framework, the day-ahead demand has been updated to reflect that the actual need for resources is lower, and so the price is reduced for all customers. The customer that has shifted is able to lock in the price savings from the arbitrage based on the week ahead forecast, and the customers that do not shift or cannot shift are able to enjoy the benefits of improved system efficiency as well. So that's an important consideration and a motivation for why the CalFuse proposal does include the transactive layer. Next slide, please. Other benefits that the staff white paper identifies include that the transactive layer can improve visibility, planning, and operations for system operators and distribution operators. It provides a feedback loop to manage scheduling, especially of EV charging, which has been identified by the Energy Commission as being potentially an important consideration as the number of electric vehicles on the grid increases. For the system operator, it improves visibility, reduces load forecast error. It has the potential to, at least. And for customers, advanced customers with transactive energy management tools can optimize their cost, and it locks in price savings for all customers. Next slide, please. It's worth highlighting the PNNL study, the Pacific Northwest National Lab study that I mentioned earlier, which was a simulation of a transactive system for the ERCOT grid. This was a study conducted by PNNL and was funded by the Department of Energy, and this result was released earlier this year. It was a slightly more advanced version of the transactive framework that is described in the CalFuse proposal. Forecasts of available supply and demand bids from customers are used to generate prices here. Simply the forecasts of demand are used to create one-way transactive tenders. But in that study, as is proposed in the CalFuse proposal, the transactive price is bidirectional, symmetric, and revenue neutral. The results show a significant shifting of energy use from high demand periods to low demand periods. Some of the simulations showcased reduced peak loads of as high as 15%, with reduced daily load swings of as high as 44%, and these led to similar reductions in wholesale price variations. There was a net annual benefit of nearly 20% of total ERCOT system costs. This translates to roughly $5 billion from reduced wholesale energy costs and deferred infrastructure upgrade costs. So it's both energy cost reductions and the deferred need for capacity upgrades. And from an equity standpoint, the study found that participating customers, those customers that are participating in the transactive layer and responding to transactive prices, achieved savings of 16%, whereas non-participating customers also achieved savings of an equal magnitude. So this is an important consideration worth highlighting. There's a clarifying question by Jan Greiger. The question is, the PNL study showed large benefits from a very large complex system with day-ahead and real-time prices. Transactive energy bid into the wholesale market. Is there any indication of how much those benefits are due to adding additional amount of batteries, how much is from charging, and how much is due to the transactive element? I think that's a fair question. I don't want to misstate the results of the study, but it's not simply adding resources that was responsible for the cost reductions. It was the response of those. It was the responsiveness of those resources, the flexibility of those resources to respond to appropriate prices that were a large part of the cost reductions that were modeled. So I think that that the results of those studies do suggest the importance of demand flexibility. Next slide, please. Some of the key implementations questions for the transactive layer include whether there should be one system for the whole state, or should there be multiple systems, perhaps one per distribution company or one per LSE. What are the processes, agreements, and understandings that are necessary between distribution companies and load-serving entities to facilitate the transactive elements? What standards, rules, and regulations are required to facilitate an efficient transactive system? What regulatory oversight is required? And what are the factors that should be considered in formulating the bids? I'll again end by noting that the staff white paper does not call for the transactive framework to be immediately implemented statewide and offered to all customers. It is just one element that the staff proposal recommends is worth considering as an advanced option for customers that could best benefit from access to the features and benefits that are offered by it. And it may be more important to consider as we continue the energy transition, and as there are more and more devices that are able to respond to flexible prices on a more advanced basis. Next slide, please. So that ends the discussion of the various elements of the CalFuse framework. We'll end with the we'll end with an overview of the various IOU pilots that have been authorized by the Commission for both CalFuse type dynamic rates as well as more general purpose dynamic rates. So next slide, please. There have been two CalFuse specific or pilots based on the CalFuse that incorporate many elements of the CalFuse framework that have been authorized by the Summer Reliability Phase 2 decision. And these were both authorized to launch on May 1st of this year. The first is the AgFit Agricultural Pumping Dynamic Rate Pilot, which is jointly being conducted by VCE, PG&E, Polaris Pumping, a pumping service automation provider, and TMIX, the Transactive Energy Price System provider. This pilot has been authorized for 5 megawatts and has roughly 1 megawatt of customer enrollment already. And the motivation behind this pilot is that it provides farmers with a week ahead price, with up to week ahead prices that they can use to pre-schedule irrigation cycles using the TMIX transactive layer. The second CalFuse pilot that has been authorized is the SCE rates phase 2 pilot, which will be open to all commercial and industrial customers and residential customers in Edison's territory, and will be available across all of SCE's service territory. The phase 1 rates pilot was limited to a few customers at one substation. The second phase pilot is to be available to customers all across Edison territory. There's a question about the launch date for the pilot. Both pilots were authorized to launch on May 1st. I think that they're in different stages of enrolling customers, and as far as the finalizing and are finalizing various implementation details. So it's worth going directly to both VCE and SCE to get the most up-to-date details for parties that are interested in participation in those pilots. The next slide highlights the current and upcoming IOU dynamic rate pilots that have been also authorized or in the process of being authorized by the Commission. PG&E has 2 RTP pilots based on the day-ahead hourly market price that have both been authorized to launch in October of 2023. The commercial EV day-ahead RTP pilot is a rate that's offered to commercial EV customers. And also, in addition to the day-ahead wholesale market price, it also includes a dynamic marginal capacity cost adder, which is a scarcity-based adder, and a time-differentiated revenue-neutral adder. The generation component of both the EV day-ahead RTP rate and the GRC2 general RTP rate, which is open to multiple customer classes, are similar. For the EV customers, the distribution rate includes a discounted demand charge subscription where customers can pre-subscribe to their to a demand quantity, and there's also in consideration a cost-based export rate rider for the EV specific rate. San Diego, as part of its GRC2 requirement, and for the high-powered EV customers, submitted 2 applications for an RTP rate and an export rider for EV customers. Both these applications have been consolidated into a single proceeding. For both of these, the rate design includes day-ahead hourly market prices and a CPP adder to recover for the marginal capacity costs. San Diego is to revise its application in supplemental testimony based on certain staff guidelines that were presented as part of that proceeding. I will again note that all the above pilots offer dynamic generation rates, but do not include dynamic distribution rates, whereas the CalFuse proposal or the CalFuse pilots that were presented in the previous slide include both generation and distribution capacity prices that are dynamic. So with that, we've come to the end of the presentation, at least the briefing on the staff white paper. So I'll stop there and invite others to come on questions.
Great presentation, Achintya. I do want to let everyone know we're going to have a clarifying questions Q&A right now before we go to lunch. And when we come back, then we will have a true Q&A section where we can really kind of get into some of the nitty-gritty details. So please feel free to start putting some of your questions into the chat and raising your hands, and we will begin to call on you. But I will let Achintya mostly lead this since you've done such a good job.
So there was a clarifying comment with regards to the EV day-ahead RTP rate for PG&E that has a pending settlement that would compensate for exports. So yes, as indicated, that would be an export rate rider.
Yeah, sorry. Could we hold off on addressing matters in another proceeding?
Sure.
Just a reminder. Is there something from Mohit there that Achintya you can address?
Let me see here. This is a question of RA requirements and how those may change based on different based on the CalFuse proposal. I think Mohit is offering a comment that the proposal will have a positive impact because it'll better align energy consumption with marginal costs of incremental consumption. There was a question regarding, in addition to RA requirements, how will this impact IRP procurement requirements? How will this count in an ELCC/PCAP type of PRM calculation?
Want me to take a stab at that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think, I guess, I don't know, maybe you can go first, Alok.
Sure. I guess I would offer a general comment. If you're going to have demand flexibility scaled to, a widespread level, you should expect that it would interact and affect all our existing processes, whether that's distribution planning or integrated resources procurement or resource adequacy, forecasting, et cetera, et cetera. And, I think whatever modeling we do, just as one example, I think there's going to be interesting questions to consider as to how does modeling accommodate a scenario where demand is reacting to supply side conditions. And I think this is such a complex question that I think we would be interested in how stakeholders view this. Just feedback and comments and analytics analysis by stakeholders on this question would be helpful, or a related set of questions. Right? No specific answer, but the general expectation is there would be interaction and impacts.
And it possibly would be an iterative process as well, right, presumably.
And by the way, when I said that, I'm also thinking that that's a positive thing, not a negative thing. Right.
Yeah, I think it should really break down some silos, and in particular between the CPUC and the Energy Commission around the IPER process, as we align kind of the scarcity pricing functions with, assumptions built into that IPER as well. So I think that's a necessary step. But in general, it's going to require a tremendous amount of coordination across the CPUC branches, subdivisions, and with the Energy Commission as well, and obviously a lot of new technological capacity.
Well, we have an additional question from Scott Olson asking the envisioned time frame for transactive tenders, questioning could it be as long as months in advance where you kind of lock in those transactive tenders, or is it generally more like what Achintia talked about, which is kind of the 1 week time frame?
Yeah, and I think to answer this question, the subscription element is essentially sort of a month ahead or a year ahead version of the transactive framework. It's just a month ahead based on a customer's typical average profile. So the envisioned timeframe, or the timeframe outlined in the white paper, is on a week ahead basis, a rolling week ahead basis, and that's because that's sort of when generally load forecasts are available from various entities that can provide those load forecasts and demand forecasts. So that's the initial recommendation with regards to how the transactive tenders could be offered.
And add to that, I wanted to address a related question that was in the chat in case other people didn't see my response. And that is the transactions that are being talked about here in the CalFuse proposal are really one-way tenders from LSEs to customers. The proposal does not call for what was typically has been associated with transactive energy, and that is, sort of a peer-to-peer setup where customers are offering and accepting tenders between the peers. So this is a more limited scenario of LSEs offering tenders and customers accepting if they like the price. But of course, again, this is kind of a topic that stakeholders should weigh in on during the proceeding as to how simple or advanced this feature could be and how it might evolve over time.
There's a question from Yan regarding whether staff, if staff is proposing that generation capacity costs be based on RA prices or the MGCC costs that come out from the marginal generation capacity costs that come out from GRC phase 2s, which at least for PG&E and certainly for Edison as well and San Diego represent the long run cost for building new capacity. Yes, to clarify, staff is proposing the long-term marginal costs be used because that is what is trying to be addressed. There will, of course, be some interplay between those scarcity prices that are based on long-term costs and how that impacts a utility's RA obligation as more demand flexibility reduces, for instance, peak load during certain periods of the year.
And to add to that, what Achintia just talked about is specific to IU bundle customers. It's certainly conceivable that Other LSEs or POUs, to the extent they're participating in this architecture, this CalFuse framework, could make different choices about how to create the generation capacity price function.
There's a question from Kathy Yap, which asks whether staff is envisioning that all customers would go onto CalFuse, or would it be offered as a rate option, at least initially? I guess maybe I'm not quite seeing the nuance difference. Is it a question of whether the other elements of the proposal, perhaps elements 5 and 6, are all bundled? With the rate option, maybe Kathy could either unmute or.
I think she's just simply asking whether this is an optional framework or whether it would be something more than that in the long run. I'm assuming, Kathy, you're free to chime in here, and we've envisioned that this would be an optional framework to begin with and see how it goes. And to the extent that it's successful, maybe then start with larger commercial industrial customers on an opt-out basis. But that's further down the line. We would have to just really kind of see how it goes. I don't know if that answers all of your question, but feel free to chime in if it doesn't.
We have a raised hand from Brad Heathner, who I am unmuting now.
Thank you. Yeah, Brad Hebner from California Solar and Storage Association. First off, let me just say fantastic work on this white paper and the whole thing. It's really well thought out, well researched, well presented. I think you've done a great job. So I was going to wait until after lunch to ask this question, but seeing as there's time, maybe I'll dive in right now. It has to do with the subscription element, and I'm a little confused. I haven't quite figured out how the updating of the profile would work, and how it would be to the benefit or not to the benefit of the customer. Because if you lock in your profile in year one, and then you do a lot of load shifting, a lot of behavioral change in response to the rate signals, and then if your profile were to be updated, you'd sort of wipe out those benefits, and presuming that the signals are relatively consistent year to year, you could no longer get the additional benefit. But then at one point in the paper, I think you suggested that there could be annual updates to the subscription profile. But then when you were describing the Georgia tariff, you said that they don't even allow customers to update based on reactions to RTP signal, which I would think the customers wouldn't want to. I would think that's not something you would even want to do. So it's confusing that would be prohibited. So am I thinking about this wrong, or would you lock in? Would a customer typically lock in at the beginning of enrollment and not change it for years and years, or is there a different dynamic?
I think the dynamic we were going for was that it would be iteratively updated annually. We're of course open to hearing from everyone about what the potential pros and cons of that would be, but I mean really to measure how customers perform year over year on that and readjust annually. We know that the Georgia tariff does not allow for that, and there's probably good revenue collection reasons for it. Not sure. I'm going to let Achintia maybe address anything further beyond that, but I think that's where we wanted to start as a starting point and see how it goes.
Yeah, and I think we leave the door open because, yes, I think, Brad, as you've identified, there are considerations that go into whether or not these are updated. I think it's important to perhaps split updates based on response versus updates based on investments, right? I mean, the Georgia tariff does allow for updates based on customer investments in new appliances or new devices. And so I think that is an important part of the update. This is more tied to the total energy amount that a customer uses on perhaps an annual basis. But with respect to response to the prices and whether those should drive updates, I think that would require some more extensive modeling and some more extensive stakeholder feedback to walk through these considerations and the pros and cons of updating or not updating, or having some sort of a filter in how customer behavior is incorporated into the subscriptions themselves. So I think this is it's a ripe it's ripe ground for discussion. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, and to be clear, I think that there's a clear benefit of hedging, of reducing risk. If there is no subscription, then the customer is exposed to way more risk than other players in the market, and reducing that risk is a sensible thing to do. But I'm just trying to figure out how you would you wouldn't want to wipe out the delta that you're benefiting from because you've done what you're supposed to do.
Right. No, and it's a fair point, and we do bring that up. I mean, I think that is one of the items that we discuss in the white paper, because there's good reasons for preserving some part of that subscription as fairly static, to not sort of negatively impact customers that are shifting load in response to the dynamic price.
I see a question from.
That's a perfect segue into Luke Tugas's question, asking about if the white paper talks about any lessons learned from other states that have implemented real-time pricing, and how this paper kind of addresses some of those concerns.
Your question is more energy division generally, not the white paper. I mean, I can take part of it. I mean, we have looked at real-time price experience in other jurisdictions. For example, Illinois in ComEd and Ameren utilities. And we have noted the positive feedback from the Citizens Utility Board in terms of their advocacy of making real-time price available to all customers, all classes. And in fact, they were suggesting make it available on a default basis. We're not going that far. We're still suggesting that this be opt-in. Achinta, you want to add any other experience points?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to highlight that Chapter 6 of the white paper highlights a variety of studies that staff felt were relevant, and staff has incorporated various elements of these different ongoing pilots or ongoing rates into the proposal. So in addition to the ComEd version, there's also extensive discussion of the Georgia Power RTP tariff as well. So yes, I think that staff has availed themselves of similar approaches in other states. There was a question from Herman about whether there's any cybersecurity concerns for the price machine. And I think this is a question that, I mean, I guess at some level, there's always going to be some cybersecurity concerns, but I'm not sure if there's a specific reason why this approach would have more or less cybersecurity concerns, or would need any less emphasis in making sure that those concerns are addressed than any other approach.
Yeah, it is something that would be interesting for stakeholders to weigh in on. I mean, I would note that Kaiser right now publishes prices in real time, and prices are widely available. So it's not clear to me, what the cybersecurity implications are of something like that. And I assume Price Machine would be something analogous, but again, I think it's an area that we need to get more educated on.
I mean, yeah, I think a lot of the inputs to the Price Machine are forecasts of system load or circuit load. And those forecasts would need to be, I mean, to some extent, some of these forecasts are public. I mean, CAISO forecasts are often public. There are certain forecasts that maybe the distribution company would want to maintain some degree of security or secrecy on from a proprietary standpoint. So those might be some considerations, but certainly nothing that could not be addressed through a robust stakeholder process.
There's a question from Gabriel Petlin in the Q&A asking, how will real-time price signals interact with TOU price signals? And does the real-time rate override the TOU rate?
It's not set to override the TOU rate at this point, which is default or mandatory for most customer classes. We believe, as I think we've asserted through the course of the paper and here today, that the future of the grid requires us to move beyond TOU as an attempt to facilitate greater pricing that facilitates greater flexible end uses, provides a level of ability to arbitrage pricing at all hours of the day in order to better utilize the grid. And so this is a longer term goal. We also feel that obviously the more that people are opting into the CalFuse framework, the better off all customers will be in terms of system savings long run, potentially even on a very mild or incremental basis. So it doesn't overstep or replace TOU, but I would say that maybe long run we're looking, instead of having at one point, right, we had tiered rates as the foundation, an off ramp to tiered rates from TOU. I think the future might even be an off ramp from CalFuse to TOU, as opposed to from TOU to tiered rates. So just kind of moving and advancing the rate structure forward to accommodate a much more complicated grid with many more DER resources integrated in the future. If you guys want to add something to that, feel free.
Andrew, what's the next question?
Next question is from Amy Westervelt, and her question is, how are you thinking about coordinating LSEs, scheduling coordinators, and others around the sharing of customer attributes, for example, DER ownership, as it pertains to ongoing adjustments to their subscription costs? And what options do you see for facilitating data sharing with the granularity and frequency required for this?
I mean, it's a good question with a lot to unpack there. To some extent, I mean, the subscriptions would be offered from the load serving entity to the customers. That's sort of the first interface, and that's based on customer usage data. So there isn't necessarily a need for details about what our customers' devices are. We certainly don't envision the need for increasing the amount of information that customers need to submit. There should be sort of a load-based or customer usage-based basis for the initial subscriptions. Certainly, with regards to adjustments, this is again goes back to the question of whether subscriptions should be adjusted based on an annual basis using a rolling average or something along the lines. There could be a process, when customer purchases a new DER to, for instance, add on to their subscription based on a pre-approved amount that is attributed to a certain type of DER. That's one option. But I think a variety of options do merit discussion, and certainly including what data sharing or facilitation of data sharing needs to be done to achieve this. But again, I think the staff proposal starts out with from the starting point that customer usage data, which is already available to utilities, historical usage data, is the basis, is the starting point for subscriptions. And to the extent that these need to be adjusted, yes, these discussions would need to be addressed.
And I guess in terms of coordination with scheduling coordinators and other entities, I think the other part of the question, and the idea here is that to the extent you have subscriptions as well as transactions locked in, the LSEs and UDCs presumably have more visibility into expected demand as opposed to having no visibility and making a forecast based on that. So the aggregation of subscriptions and transactive transactions presumably gives them a higher confidence forecast that would be reflected in their schedules into the Kaiser market and the prices that are, developing in that process. Fair enough? Next question.
And our next question comes from Jan Gregor again, specifically asking for customers with lots of HVAC loads, subscription load would be high when last year had heat waves, but this year the HVAC demand would align with current heat waves. Is staff considering some kind of weather-based adjustment, or would that make things too complicated?
Yeah, I mean, this is a point that is highlighted in the staff proposal. So there are multiple options to how subscriptions are designed. I mean, one of those, as I've highlighted, would be directly based on customer historical load. The other could be based on a class average customer load, or that has climate as one of the factors. And so that could be a way in which the customer hedges are offered. Again, I think it's important to note that these subscriptions are a hedge. I mean, it doesn't preclude customers from, it doesn't lock in anything to the customers. It allows customers to fully respond to the dynamic price as appropriate. And so some tweaks to the hedge or some tweaks to the methodology by which the hedges are offered based on climate factors could certainly be considered.
One thing I want to clarify is, we keep saying customers will do this and customers will react. What we really mean is their devices and their third parties will be intercepting the prices and responding accordingly. We're not really expecting an average customer to be paying attention to the prices or making any decisions based on that. So you would think that over time the devices and the third parties managing them, would have the appropriate artificial intelligence. The required artificial intelligence there, doesn't seem that sophisticated compared to the type of AI that's already incorporated in your average consumer devices. So I guess the point is that the subscription you could see as a transition vehicle. It's not clear to me that subscriptions in the long term are necessarily needed as customers gain confidence in their devices and third parties' ability to manage in response to more dynamic prices. And maybe they just rely on transactive offers at that point rather than subscription. I'm just raising that as a possibility.
Our next question comes from D. Hines asking, would demand response or demand side response to dynamic prices preclude DER from being aggregated for market-based dispatch programs? That is, what is the coordinated interplay with emerging FERC 2222 DER participation frameworks such that DER responses aren't double counted?
I can take that. So in general, at least to date, the Commission policy has been to, there's been a set of rules adopted in the context of, they go under the label of dual participation or avoiding double counting. So in general, the policy has been that if a customer is enrolled in a dynamic rate, that customer is not eligible for a supply-side program. Now, the same logic could be applied here, but I think it's still it's probably an open question for stakeholders to debate in the proceeding as to whether two should be mutually exclusive or there could be some overlap. I mean, given that the CalFuse signal is informed by the CAISO market real-time prices, it does seem like there would be some double counting if that same customer was participating in a supply side DR that's also reacting to the same price in the wholesale market. So I mean, I guess I'll stop there, and certainly some, maybe in the afternoon, other people can weigh in on this from among the stakeholders.
And we've got a hand raised from Janet Zabala at SCE. So I'm giving you unmute access now. Oh, the hand went down. So I guess I saw you unmute for a moment. All right. Alok, do we want to do any more questions, or do we want to break for lunch?
I mean, I think that's a question for the whole panel.
How are we feeling, everyone?
I think let's do one or two more. I see something from Ed Levine, which I don't think we addressed it, right? I'm also not sure what exactly the question is. As technology is available to benefit customers with new tariffs, what is the current thinking to have contact information of commercial and residential customers? So maybe we can give the mic to Ed, and could he try to clarify the question? Ed Levine?
Yeah, Ed, if you'd like to raise your hand, then I'll be able to unmute you.
If not, there is a follow-up question on the cyber security concern with regards to the security of the distribution side. I think it's important to sort of clarify perhaps what the proposal is suggesting. I mean, this is a question of demand forecasts that are incorporated directly from the distribution company to a price platform that is responsible for generating a price that is appropriate to a certain customer based on their location on the system. So there isn't a sort of general purpose feedback loop that's coming from distribution side resources. It's a single stream of information coming from the utility distribution company or a contractor that is being used to inform the appropriate price. So I think there certainly have been concerns about cybersecurity for various kinds of DERMS-based systems where there are direct signals going to a variety of distribution devices that control signals. The CalFuse proposal is not suggesting any form of control signal going from any interface to any other interface. This is merely a posting of a price that is appropriate to a customer based on their location on the distribution system that they then use to change their behavior. So I think that's something that I wanted to clarify and say that there's very limited points of entry in terms of the information that is required to create a CalFuse type signal.
And along the same lines, just to further clarify, I mean, we're not envisioning the price machine itself to be accessible by, your average customer. It's a it's a machine that's being maintained by either the UDC or the LSC for the sole purpose of computing the real-time price and feeding it to the price portal. There's no need for the price machine to be accessible by anybody else. So to that extent, I think, I just want to make sure that people understand that. But, ultimately the point that Chintia makes about there are no control signals coming out of price machine here. So,
I think while it could be interruptive, as any cyber threat or hacking issue could be, I don't know that CalFuse framework in and of itself is just an open pricing framework with greater transparency for customers is because of the lack of a control signal. I don't think that it poses much more of a threat or disaster situation any more than we already have with potential hackers and or cybersecurity problems. That's just my feeling right now, but we admittedly have not thought through all the permutations and potentials around that. So would love to hear more from those of you who have concerns to share.
and maybe now we can take a break.
And there was sorry, before Andrew, there was a question of circling back to the equity and DAC considerations, and I think that would be a topic that we certainly intend to go into great detail on in the afternoon session. So acknowledging that we did not address it yet, but this is meant to be clarifying questions related to the framework, and that's a larger discussion that merits more extended dialogue.
And in fact, there may be other questions that we haven't addressed, so let's just try to either pick them up in the afternoon, or hopefully whoever is asking those questions can just remind us and pose those questions again. Andrew, you want to call it the break?
Yes, so thank you everyone for staying through for our first half of the day. We will be ending the recording now so that in the second half of the day, anyone can feel free to speak freely and it will not be recorded by us and posted on the CPUC website. So thank you everyone. Please be back at 1 p.m. and we will continue more with equity and other concerns and questions. So thank you all.